Thanks for joining me, Locust. So nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Thank you.
How's everything up in the Blue Mountains today?
Oh, beautiful. We've got the cicadas in full flight, 20 degrees, bare feet, two dogs on the floor.
Beautiful part of the world up there. How long have you been up in Katoomba?
Probably off and on 20 years.
Hmm.
Yeah, I was originally from New Zealand on a farm, and when I was in Sydney, I always kept driving away, venturing further west, and then I settled on this place. Yeah.
Beautiful part of the world, but also as we were speaking last week, had quite uh, I guess, an interesting part of the world in terms of when the fires came through last year as well. Quite a scary part of the world. I guess surrounded by beautiful natural landscape, but yeah, really sort of critical point where some of those fires got quite close to you earlier in the year.
Mm. They sure did. So, but that was a sort of silver lining, really, because I was working on a drawing at the time, and well, it changed as the fire gained intensity and it came closer and closer, and the helicopters started coming over the studio and on their way to get water from the dams. So the work, the 10 meter drawing I started on was at the beginning of the fires, was started in response to a trip to the Middle East I did in October last year, but it was intercepted by the fires. So the drawing's title is that's actually on it in Katoomba actually at the moment at the Blue Mountains Cultural Centre in a show called Critical Mass. The drawing's title is Jerusalem to Hebron via Beirut and the Curse of the Helicopter Rotor Blades. So the natural environment, the helicopters, the research trips, the dogs, everything, conspires to, for me, comes in processed, reprocessed, and then comes out as what you see behind me, what you see behind you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it must have been quite an interesting time in terms of obviously you'd been overseas late last year and were doing quite a bit of work over there, and it informed the start of that new work that you're making. But then for everything to sort of come quite close to home as well, you're saying that the water bombers were down at the golf course and collecting water, and it must have been quite a scary but strangely inspiring sort of experience to have that action so close to home, perhaps.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the noise, and there was three or four of them, so they couldn't all pick up the water at the same time. So they were queuing over the studio, and I had just bought a new video camera that I had bought before I went to the Middle East. So I was running down there with the camera, smoke everywhere, helicopters, and lying underneath the helicopters as they're coming in to get the water. It sort of was, yeah, I mean, it's the same as COVID. It's pretty pandemic. It's been a catalyst or like a silver lining for me, all these disasters and natural disasters and what's happening in the world. I mean, this morning I was listening to the war that's just broken out in Nagorno-Karabakh, and two amazing words, Nagorno-Karabakh, and they sound so exotic, but when you do the research, they're just some horrible war-torn places in the Caucasus. So I kind of find things like that, or like the fires, or like the world, geopolitics, COVID-19, the pandemic. It's all, forms the basis for the drawings. Like the work Geronimo behind you was in response to the US under Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. They were in the Situation Room, and they took out Osama bin Laden in Pakistan. And that particular drawing was started in response to that operation. And of course, it was titled Geronimo in response. So there's always a catalyst to start the work. There always has to be some kind of disaster like the fires or a trip to the Middle East. And for me to absorb enough information or enough experience, and for me to actually want to begin something new, something fresh. Yeah.
I'd love to hear a bit more about your trip to the Middle East last year, and I guess what you got up to and what you sort of learned or what you brought back from that trip.
Well, it was started by a friend of mine in London had gone to a refugee camp in Bethlehem, the Ada refugee camp, and had done a tour with Green Olive Tours. And he emailed me saying, you should come over and we should meet in Jerusalem and you know, do a drawing project with these kids, you know. So we met in Jerusalem and got a taxi to Bethlehem and stayed in Bethlehem for a week and worked with about 12 to 15 refugee children. I took over a big drawing, actually my friend Simon brought over from London a big 10-meter roll of paper. And the kids unrolled it on the floor of the community centre, and we brought over inks and pens and pencils and drawing materials. And over the course of a week, they came in and were lying on the floor, making the work, you know, drawing their immediate experiences. So there were some pretty harrowing visions coming from their heads, and it was a pretty harrowing place to be because it was right next to the apartheid wall, or the separation barrier that Israel has erected between the West Bank and Israel. And their great grandparents had first gone there in 1948 to this particular area. And it's just a grey, broken place with not much hope, but there's so much love and hope within these children that I guess the resilience they've had to endure this experience, this life. So they've had to build up this resilience. And I guess the family structure is very strong, and that helps them survive in these areas. But the ground was littered with tear gas canisters and rubber bullet casings. So the kids are always, you know, throwing rocks over the separation barrier, which is about 8 meters high. And the Israelis Defense Force soldiers are retaliating with rubber bullets. And so it was quite a far cry from downtown Katoomba in the Blue Mountains. So I went there. Then we took a car around the rest of the West Bank, like Ramallah and down to Hebron. And so I took a lot of photos, a lot of videos. And when I got back, I had these photos, and that's how the light boxes came about. It's a new direction of putting the photographs from my trip into the light boxes, and then putting drawings on backlit film over the top of the photographs. So you're looking at the actual photographs of the area that I had visited, and then my response to that area or that trip.
Had you worked like that before in terms of, I guess, I'm familiar with like the work behind me, Geronimo, in terms of, I guess, using paper as that sort of background support and working onto that. Had you used that sort of photographic imagery before to sort of work on that?
Yeah, that's good question. So the work behind you, most of those people are actually from newspaper clippings. And but in a response to my own self-criticism, I thought, I can't just sit here and believe or take other people's photographs and put them in my drawings. So that's another reason to keep traveling. But you can't travel now. We were supposed to go back early next year and do the same trip with Israeli children. But the photograph has always been, ever since my first trip to Lebanon in 1999 and to Syria, the photograph has always been something that sort of was the beginning of my drawing career, that particular trip, because I went there and I thought, having grown up in New Zealand listening to TV news, American-centric biases about Hezbollah, about, Israel. And I went over there and I was confronted with the complete opposite to what I'd been fed, for the last 30 years. And through meeting people like journalists and other writers and filmmakers and artists over there, local people, it sort of came back to Australia, and I thought, well, the world isn't the way I see it. So that was the beginning of this particular, well, the work behind you, the work behind me. And I think it's been since 2006 was the first time I made one of these long kind of timeline drawings. I took it to an exhibition in Mumbai, India, and it was the first thing that sold before the opening, and I thought, oh, well, this is a good one. I might do some more of these, and haven't really looked back. Yeah. But they're great because they're timelines, and the one I took to India was actually a response to the bombing in Mumbai, the Taj Mahal, and that was the catalyst for that particular thing. And then the end of that work was a response to the Gaza war in 2006, I think it was. Yeah, so interesting.
In terms of that, I guess the idea of the timeline, does that influence, I guess, your choice in terms of these huge 10-meter spans of paper? A lot of your work is sort of these huge, long horizontal strips of paper or vertical. Is that the timeline dictating that sort of the formal decision making?
Well, yeah, they've become, for me, I can come out to the studio and just continue on for weeks and weeks on end. And it's sort of like a natural crutch, really. Like, I don't come out to the studio and scratch my head and think, what am I going to do today? Because it's there in front of me and it's been unrolling. And the longest one I did took 12 months. It was 100 meters long. And I did it in the living room. And I was doing it in 2 meter stretches, but it was great. It's a great thing to do because you can be eating your breakfast and listening to the news, sitting at the table with the drawing, just there. And there's coffee stains and everything goes into it, and then lunch and dinner, and not that I'm spilling everything all over it, but it's something like it becomes a part of your life. So it's not only about the world, it's about personal experiences. And I mean, I have 2 dogs here in the studio, and I'm sure the monochromatic nature of my work, which is mostly just black ink, comes from the dogs because they're black kelpies. And but the timelines, yeah, so I always date the work when I start it, and then I date it throughout. Like I just dated this one the 11th of October, and it might be finished at Christmas time. If I'm working on other things, it's really nice to just have them there. And even if I'd start working on a new project, I can roll them up and then unroll them. They're always there, you know.
Mm, mm, yeah. I wanted just to sort of step back a little bit and ask you how you became an artist, and where was your sort of, I guess, initial interest and fascination in mark making? How did that come about?
Well, that's a good question, because at school I didn't like art, and but I was a farmer when I left school, and I was brought up on a farm, and I just wanted to be a farmer. And then I went traveling after 4 or 5 years of farming, and had a violent car accident overseas. A few years of treatment and hospitalization, and then I went to art school. So it was a completely random thing that happened that was a catalyst for me being an artist, or yeah, mark making. And pretty much that's it in a nutshell, really.
How about, I guess, just in terms of the style of your work is, you can tell, like, you just know your work. It's got such a beautiful look to it, especially that the black ink feel, but that, yeah, I guess the amazing mark making and the storytelling as well. It's very, you've got a very unique and beautiful style. How did that come about? Did that evolve out of art school? Were you making other types of work to begin with? How did you sort of get to this point?
Um, yeah, like at the beginning, I was making work about my injuries. I had a lot of X-rays. Um, it was quite violent and narcissistic, and a lot of self-portraits. And I guess the the way the work looks now is a response to what's going on in the world, and how I take imagery from around the world and then put it in folders, and then go back and look at it. Like, I've got boxes and boxes of newspapers and magazines, but these days I don't really read the newspapers as much, because now I have the internet, and I'll sit here and listen to different news channels from around the world. But getting back to your question about what was it about your question?
I guess
Oh yeah,
the development of your style.
yeah, the development of style. I guess it's just comes about through drawing every day. Yeah, I haven't really been keeping tabs on, how it's been developing, but
Yeah.
just looking at the work behind you, I mean, I can see that it's developed. I mean, they're quite beautiful colours in there, but, and I guess with this one behind me, there's still the bluey sort of reddish colours, but this one here, with getting back to the development of style, now I'm getting into collages. So I'll show you this one. Has a particular, these are collages that I've been putting on top of the drawing. So I guess that's the development. If you come out to the studio every day and work, then something's going to happen. I mean, I hope that I'm not going to do the same work for the rest of my life.
Well, I guess it's quite nice to see that development and that progression, and having the confidence to be able to expand your practice as well. You were mentioning earlier that you're working on an animation as well, or about to start working on an animation. That sounds pretty exciting.
Yeah, well, I've never done any animation. I've sort of wanted to, but we'll see what happens. But the gallery is providing me with an animation, a studio technician, so I'm sure that'll be helpful, because something I've never done before. But it would be nice, just like the collage element in these and the light boxes, it would be nice to see the work start to move.
Yeah. I wonder if I could ask that we could have a bit of a look around the studio. And I guess one of the other questions was, and I know you've got a work that you sort of recently started. How do you get started? Is it just that the idea, like with Geronimo, it's about that that simple idea that then you expand into, or how does that idea come about to start a new work?
Well, that was a photograph that I saw in a newspaper, and I cut it out. The Geronimo, it was Operation Geronimo when they took out Osama bin Laden. And then from there, obviously, there's not 10 meters of Geronimo. There's everything else that happens in that time period. Like, I think this was the time of, this could be sporting, there's crosswords, and usually they take something like 4-6 weeks. So everything in that, everything following on from the initial starting point is about what is happening, like, so it's not all about the first reference point.
Yeah.
Like, I can see kind of monkey faces and crosswords and a portrait of Hillary Clinton and the work behind you. And International
Monetary Fund.
Monetary Fund. I think that was the time that the director of the IMF was sacked. He was Dominic Strauss-Kahn, that's right. And that was, so I'll find a story like the IMF and that guy, and then another thread will start happening, and that'll lead me to something else. And then at the back of every newspaper, there's a crossword. So I might be reading the newspaper and I'll start doing the crossword, and then I'll get to another newspaper and there'll be a different story. Or a bird might fly through the window and land in the drawing, which it did once. So, and I left it on the drawing. Or a possum might die in the roof, which it did once. And I'd been away for a few days and I was drawing away, and suddenly all these maggots started dropping all around me onto the drawing, because all the drawings are done on big trestle tables. Yeah. So, and the maggots just started sticking into the ink. They're still there, actually. But that was pretty revolting. And so...
Not Geronimo, is it? It's not that work, is it?
No, that was a few years ago. Like, I'll start with these two fellas down here. These are Party and Chinook. So they're there most days, keeping me company.
Great studio assistants to have.
Yes, they're good studio dogs. So we'll start with this light box here. Was one of the light boxes I was telling you about earlier. This is a photograph of some of the boys that were helping me with the drawing, standing outside the Ada refugee camp, and the drawing and the red pigment and shellac is my response to that particular area. So this is the big work, and the work beside it in black and white is oil bar on mylar, which is going to be turned into a lithograph. This one here, another lithograph that I will send down to Melbourne to get printed.
It's great that you can still have that, I guess, accessibility during this sort of current time where you can start the process of those lithographs. It's great that you can keep working away on those.
Yeah. These are some more works. I'll just unplug this computer. After my trip to Bethlehem and Jerusalem, I went to Beirut and visited another refugee camp, the Sabra camp in the southern suburbs of Beirut. And this was a photograph, the Grand Sofa Hotel, on the Beirut to Damascus highway that I went to. And it used to be the meeting place for the very famous people like Omar Sharif, and back in the 1960s, 70s, before the Civil War. Went a bit crazy with the collage elements in that one.
Colour's quite amazing with the light box, isn't it? With that sort of translucency. The blue in particular is really vibrant.
Yeah. Yeah, what struck me about these two guys, both with big smiles on their faces, they worked in this coal coke processing shop where they, distributed cooking coke for fires, covered in, coal dust, but really happy. It's amazing. Here's another work on mylar that's going to soon be turned into a lithograph. And a big blue and black drawing that was part of a 10-meter work, but I chopped it up. So it's nice to be able to sometimes to the 10 meters or the 100 meters get a bit much and get a bit angry, so I start chopping them up so they become sort of like mashups. And then I've got a whole bunch of drawings from years that I cut up and paste onto those. Paste onto the existing drawing. Another light box. This one has two photographs. One of them is a street in Hebron, the West Bank, the Shuhada Street, Hebron, and the other is in Al Khartoum Street in the Sabra camp in Beirut, and my response to visiting those two areas. Here's the work I'm currently working on, mostly text at this stage, but no doubt there'll be some other kind of drawings find their way into it.
Looking at the letter P.
Yeah. Getting quite into the letter P. So I start off with, the top word that I haven't actually finished is press. And then Pukeko Power Pivot Phase 2. Porcupine, Pangolin, Panacea, Penguin, yeah. So I think I might do another big one of these, which is all about letters. So that's another, when we were talking about the timeline element before, as you go along, one particular word will lead you to another word. And then before you know it, you're doing the alphabet. You're doing lists of letters from the alphabet. So yeah, it's amazing where this can take, where this takes you.
Yeah, especially when you're open, I guess, to letting those connections happen and expand across the page as well.
Yeah. Well, I guess, getting back to your earlier question about my background as a farmer, maybe when I was raking hay in the tractor once, I had been doing a few paintings and had some photographs with me, and this guy came over from Australia to visit the farm, and he was an art student at Wollongong University School of Creative Arts, and he said, these paintings look really good that you've been doing. Can I take some back to show my professors in Wollongong? Next thing you know, I had a letter of invitation to Wollongong, and here I was sitting on a tractor raking hay, and the next month I was in Wollongong, my first year at art school, and I went, "Wow, how did that happen?" So,
wow, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. So yeah.
Oh, well, it's been really wonderful to speak to you and to have a glimpse into your world, into your studio.
Cool, thank you.
Thanks so much for taking the time out to speak with me and to share your practice with our audience.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, Danny.
And
Nice to see you, and nice to see Geronimo again.
yeah, no, it was so nice to actually to get it out on display for our 50th anniversary show, which we've only been open to the public for 1 week in July, but hopefully we will be able to reopen before the show closes later in November. So yeah, looking forward to sharing your work with everyone then. But yeah, thanks so much, Locust.
Hey, you're welcome.
Okay, bye.
Bye.